some success. What I did was I took the tool and I placed it in the vise, locked it in the vise with the lens fitted tightly to it. Then I was able to get enough purchase on the shutter to rotate it and free that up. As to why it should have been so tight, there's nothing obvious there. Now I can see the shutter itself. I have a lock screw here. Which is very small and I'll have to be very careful not to lose. The retainer ring should unscrew. And then I can lift that front section off complete, which is what I should have been able to do to start off with. Now we're down to the conventional shutter. I'm looking at the construction here, see if there's anything unusual. The front speed cam ring, the shutter release lever, the cocking cam, main drive cam and spring, self timer, retard gear train. Tiny little fleck of something black there, I'm not sure what that was. Flash contact, we'll take that off. Its washer, the contact itself. There's nothing else there that needs to come off prior to splitting the case. 3 screws will hold the mechanism plate and the shutter case together. I can lift off the case. Of course our blades have come out stuck to that because I've been spraying lots of solvent in there, but they would have been quite oily anyway. There's our shutter blades. Here is our case, the diaphragm blades. They're all nice and greasy too. Given the solvents, I just squirted in there in an effort to get the centre lens group loose. That's hardly surprising. And the mechanism plate, the lens tube will be held in with 3 screws, one of which holds the bracket for the main drive spring. I'll remove that B lever and its return spring. That other lever I think I can leave in place. Right, So there I have my shutter in small pieces. And all of these components will need to be cleaned and carefully reassembled, put back in the correct order. The only struggle I'm going to have will be with my depth of field pointer arrangement at the front of the shutter, which of course I'd had to completely disassemble to try and get at that retainer ring. In the normal course of events, if this lens had just unscrewed easily, I would have unscrewed that, being able to remove the retainer ring and being able to lift off the depth of field pointer unit as one piece, and that would have been far less of a fight. However, so far so good. We haven't been entirely stalled. It's just not as easy as I'd hoped. So I've got to start cleaning this stuff up. I'll clean up the components and I'll show you as I reassemble everything. I had said that there was no obvious reason why that central lens element was so tight to get out. But looking at this lens tube here, I can see that there's a layer of black paint or lacquer around the outside, and that almost certainly was locking that lens tube in place. So somebody was over enthusiastic with the black paint when they were touching that lens up to cover up the scars they'd put into it, or they foolishly believed they needed to put some locking compound in there to stop that lens from working loose. So I'll clean all that rubbish off there with some acetone, and hopefully no other poor bugger in years to come will suffer the same fate. Reassembling this shutter. Start with the mechanism plate. That goes on there. There's a rivet, a post on there. That should be facing upwards. Yeah. We've got to get our 5 diaphragm blades fitted. I've cleaned these all carefully with a bit of naphtha. These are just laid out anti-clockwise, making sure the pivot sits down correctly in the holes. Unfortunately, there's only 5 blades, so doing one of these is a doddle. Pull the first blades back so that you can access the hole for the last couple of blades. Place the last blade. Swing the first blade back over the last blade without disturbing anything. Here we have it. Now the moving plate that rotates these blades probably sits here. That's where it would sit in a conventional synchro comp shutter of the time. And I'm going to check the case, see if that appears to be the case here. A bit of fluff there, I'll just remove that. So I know my case goes on here. So that's certainly there's 2 possible positions for that piece. And I'm looking to see which way it couples with this ring. And it's on this side, So I was correct. So that post on that plate couples up with a little hole in the case. So I lower the case carefully over this without disturbing anything. Get that little post through correctly, lift the other part of my jig off, and then I've got 3 small screws which hold that retainer plate to the inside of the shutter case. Do the screws up very lightly indeed first, in case one of the blades has become displaced while you've been doing this, because if the blade is out of position and you tighten the screws up, you're likely to damage the blade. And we wouldn't want that. So I've got my 3 screws in place. That jig can go to one side. I need to check to see that the diaphragm moves freely, and it does. These blades are not in startling condition. They've got a few little marks on them. That's not important that you get rid of those on diaphragm blades for a shutter like this. Makes absolutely no difference. All that's important is that they are free from oil and grease and move smoothly. I can tighten the 3 screws, and that's a shutter case ready to go. Now I can turn my attention to the mechanism plate and assemble that. We need a blade actuating ring. And that sits in right here, so I've got to push that lever back out of the way. Drop my blade actuating ring into the correct position. That's good. And that blade actuating ring is held in position with the lens tube. And the lens tube is held in place with 3 screws, 2 of which are the same length and 1 which is slightly longer. And the slightly longer screw holds this bracket as well. So the 2 that are the same length, I'll drop them into position. Run them lightly upward, make sure they're, as always, don't tighten the screws until you're absolutely sure that everything is seated correctly, so as to not damage anything. Just checking the action, that moves smoothly. This little bracket holds the tail of the main drive spring for the shutter. Fits over a pin there, and of the 3 screws, the longest screw goes in this position. If you get that wrong and you end up with the longest screw in one of the other 2 positions, it will protrude through the bottom of the mechanism plate and it'll foul the shutter blades. And if it fouls the shutter blades, the best thing that could happen is that the shutter won't work. But the big danger is that the blade will become damaged. Right, so if I hold this catch back out of position, slide this into the blade open position, I can check now the action of this, and it runs very smoothly indeed, to the extent that I'm not going... I often lubricate that blade actuating ring with a bit of graphite powder. I'm not going to lubricate that at all. That's running extremely smoothly anyway. So I've got this in the blade open position. This arm is up against the post. and I can assemble my shutter blades to that. I'll just get these out where I can find them. And we start here. These go on anti-clockwise. These blades have all been cleaned and they've been polished with a bit of brasso because they showed quite a few marks. Some of the marks were extremely fine corrosion. You often see a tracery like a lacework almost, and it's tiny, it's corrosion that's creeping across the metal for all practical purposes. And here we have the case, which I need to drop into the correct position, so I'm trying to see where the holes are that this thing might fit to. And here looks like a good spot. Oh, it doesn't want to fit out. Oh, it's the flash contact. This contact, I've got to get my flash contact here through that little piece at that point, so it's a bit awkward to get this lined up correctly. Yeah, I think it's in place. In which case, I'll fit the 3 screws that hold the mechanism plate and the shutter case together. And I've got to remember to demagnetise these screwdrivers because this is very annoying. If you're not quick to get the screwdriver in position on the screw as you approach it with the screwdriver, the bloody thing will lift out of the hole and become displaced. That's good. That moved smoothly and that all looks very good. So it's just a flat piece of cotton there from the cotton bud when I've been cleaning it. So far so good. Now I've got to get my internal components on the top of that mechanism plate. All the control gear and the main drive, and of course the retard gear train and so forth. So I've got to get that done. So that's my next task, find those parts and start putting them back. I'll start with the B lever and the B lever spring, and the B lever spring needs to go on first. It fits on this post. And there's a groove around that post that it sits in, so I've got to get it seated correctly in that groove. Of course it would rather be anywhere but in the correct place. And the tail of the spring comes round behind this pin here. So we've got to get that correctly positioned behind there. No, the spring's not seated correctly there. That's it, it's sitting in its groove. I can move the tail of that spring, the long tail, over this way against the centre. And the B lever. Now it's usually easier to fit that B lever when the shutter is in the fully open position. So I'll pull this lever back out of the way. Slide my shutter into the fully open position. And then the B lever should fit in here. There's a little notch in the back of the B lever that has to couple up with this spring. So you have to pull it back into position and make sure that spring fits correctly in position. That's the lever in place, but the spring is not. See if I can pull that spring around. Yes, it's all sitting in position, and there is a screw that holds that in position. The screw has got a groove around just underneath the head. In different models of this shutter, a spring would go around that groove. In this shutter, of course, it does not. There's no spring in that position. That spring's wanting to pop out of position. Let's just check it's staying. Oh, that looks good. I can tighten that up. Hold that B lever back and I'm able to drop the shutter back into the closed position, so that's all good. The flash contact, this is the moving flash contact, of course. I've got to get that in position. That goes on this post over here. There's a washer that goes on top of that lever, quite a thick washer, and one retaining screw. Checking the action of that flash contact to see that as the blade's open it does indeed make contact with the fixed contact at that point. And it should just get there as the B lever drops in, or very shortly. The B lever should drop in shortly afterwards, and it does. So that flash contact looks good. I'll check that screw again to make sure I did it up tight. The shutter's not sitting flat on the piece of wood here because the flash contact sticks out the bottom. That's why it's being a bit unsteady as I'm working on it. Here we've got the shutter release, and that should be, I normally put a touch of molybdenum paste on there. I'll find the paste. So normally I'll put a wipe of this on the shaft, and when you're using this you're using just ridiculously tiny amounts. Now something interesting here which I'll point out in a second. Where are we? Yeah, that sits in under there like that, under that lever, and that spring gets tucked back in against the case. Now, this lever here, that is very badly damaged. Looks like it's been crushed in a vise or something like that to change the shape of it. That's not accidental damage, that must have been done on purpose. For what purpose, we'll probably never know. I'll just put a white of molybdenum down that surface where it contacts the B lever, because most likely that's a little bit rough in its action at that point. I'll put some molybdenum paste. I'm just wiping a little bit around this post here and here. That's where the main drive cam picks up the shutter. That's the blade actuating ring. Right, what else do we got here? Well, we've got our main drive cam and the spring, and the cam that drives it, the cocking cam. I'll need to clean these components and we'll pop those in place. We're taking our main drive cam here. I'm just running a little bit of molybdenum through the centre, the pivot. And this curved outside edge, you should make sure that that's got some lubricant on there. Molybdenum paste is ideal for that purpose. That's where it rubs up against the lever on the retard gear train, and if it's not correctly, if it's got no lubricant, it can actually grind up against that edge and cause this grief. So if we had the shutter release open, oh, that thing there's holding us back, of course. This lever here is held back by the self-timer normally, so I haven't got enough hands to do this job. Oh, there we go, that's open and that's closed. Let's do that again. Yeah, that was all good. So that's in the closed position. I've got my spring, which only needs to be lightly lubricated. Sometimes it's well buttered up with graphite grease, and certainly no extra lubricants required. There's the little pin, a tab, bent down tab on the bottom of that spring has to drop into the hole in the cam. There we are, and I've just hooked the end of it over behind that bracket. So now we should be able to cock the shutter and fire the shutter if the self-timer had been in. Yeah, and the shutter works, that's all firing correctly. Alright, so this shutter now lacks its self-timer or delay action and the retard gear train, and not an awful lot more. So I've got to clean those. I've got them sitting in here in a jar of naphtha. And I need to work the mechanism multiple times in that naphtha to flush the mechanism, make sure any oil, grease or contaminants are washed away, and likewise making sure that the mating surface is the mate of the teeth on all the little wheels. If there's any dust or dirt or anything stuck to them, that should just rub away as the action's moved in the solvent. So generally speaking, I would run the action of the retard gear train probably about 10 times in the solvent. That's a good round number, and that's usually sufficient. If I notice any reluctance, well, I would clean it more. I'm just watching the action as it returns to the rest position. I think that's good. I need to blow the solvent out of that, along with any contaminants that it's picked up. You can see some stain on the paper at that point perhaps. It'll be from the dirty solvent. We'll check the action of that. That seems fine to me, that's good. And I need to do much the same to the self-timer or delay action. Basically, I extend this out into the cocked position and then hold back the tab that releases this, which in this case is tucked away where? Down here somewhere. And let the thing run down. And I need to do that in the solvent multiple times so that all the surfaces get washed clean, and basically that the gears are all rub against each other and shift any dust or dirt or contaminants that have settled on them. So it's a bit the alternative to doing this. There are alternatives. One alternative is that you could put the speed trains into some solvent in a jar like this and then put the jar into your ultrasonic cleaner, and that would certainly do the job. That would be a very good way to do it if you had an ultrasonic cleaner, and if you didn't mind running your ultrasonic cleaner with volatile solvents in it, which may or may not be evaporating off and creating an explosion hazard. Right, so I'll finish cleaning these two gear trains and then lubricate them lightly with graphite and we'll put them back in the shutter.